Okay, today in class we talked about the following things: story structure, point of view, and irony. I want to take a few minutes to go back through this with you because I noticed today in class that some of us were having difficulty understanding what each of these terms mean. First of all, if you'll remember story structure. Story structure means simply that, how the story is set up. We learned about setting, character, and plot. Okay, the setting is quite simply the following definition. That means where and when the story takes place. If you remember, I told you one of my favorite movies growing up was Star Wars. Always at the beginning of Star Wars, it starts out in a galaxy far, far away. Well, that tells us where the setting or where the action is going to take place. Well, in your stories that we're going to be reading this year, in ELA and also in social studies, we're going to identify where the setting is in each event. Okay, character, that's easy. You know what characters are. Those are the people or items or objects that do the action in the story. Plot, now this is kind of a little bit tricky. Plot is made up of three different parts. First of all, there's the conflict. Conflict is the problem. What are the characters having to deal with? What's the issue that they're having to deal with? In the package for Mrs. Jules, we learn that Lewis has a problem. He has to take this huge box and walk up 30 stories in a building to deliver a box. That's his problem. Well, we know after we've learned what the conflict is or what the problems are, there are certain events that are going to take place in the story. Resolution is, how does the story end? How is this conflict, how is this problem solved? That's what resolution is. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in detail in the next few classes. So remember, story structure is how the story is built. It has the setting, where and when the story takes place, the characters, and the plot. Okay? Next, story structure continued. I'm going to look at a couple more things. All stories must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or a conclusion. Okay? I shared with both classes the story about my students in the past writing stories. And sometimes they would write at the end of the story, "This is the end of my story." Well, I shouldn't see that in your writing. I shouldn't see that in stories, because I'm smart enough, and the reader should be smart enough to know when we reach the end of the story, that's it. I don't need you to tell me that's the end. But we're going to be talking in writing this year about how do we develop this? How do we develop the beginning? How do we develop the middle? How do we end, or how do we develop the end or conclusion? Okay, we're going to talk about each of these things a little bit later, but I wanted to present that to you. Okay. Also today we learned about point of view. Okay, if you'll remember, point of view means who is telling the story. Okay, if you were reading a story and it says "I" in there, that means that you are reading the story and the narrator is telling you the story. Okay? There are three different things that we learned today also. Third person is the narrator, is an observer. That means that simply this person is just standing back and they're watching all this action taking place. They may not be a part of the story. They're just standing there watching everything that's taking place. Third person limited says a narrator shares only one thought or opinion. This means the narrator will take part in the story just a little bit, but mostly they're focused on everybody else. They're not really putting themselves into the story. Third person omniscient. This is a big word that we've kind of struggled with that term today. Third person omniscient means that the narrator shares thoughts and opinions of all. Now, when that happens, third person omniscient means that the narrator throws themselves into the story or includes themselves into the story. And they tell what everybody else is doing, including themselves and their thoughts and their views on things. Okay? So again, this is third person, means the narrator is the observer. They're just standing back watching everything take place. Third person limited means that the narrator only shares only one thought or opinion. Third person omniscient means that the narrator shares the thoughts and opinions of all. Okay, tells what everybody is thinking, what their thoughts are on certain items or certain things, and also includes themselves in that. And we'll be learning a little bit more about that hopefully as the year goes along. Irony. This is the last thing that we're going to look at quickly. Irony is an outcome that is opposite of what is expected. And I drew a little character here. He says, I sure didn't expect that. Now, irony means that when you are watching or when you are reading something, I told you about one of my books that I read this summer, where I kept reading thinking that it was going to end a certain way, and at the very end the author changed things on us, and I was not expecting that. That's called irony. You've seen this done in movies, when you watch particular movies that you're really excited about, and you think this certain thing is going to happen at the end, but in the end it changes. That's called irony. Okay. For example, I've seen movies where the good guy ends up being the bad guy and the bad guy ends up being the good guy. That's an example of irony. You don't expect that, but that's the way it happens. I shared this with you. This is called text evidence. Now, we didn't really go over that a lot today, but this is something that we'll be doing a lot of this year. You saw on the board I had the words prove it. Okay. I want to explain about that. It says details in a selection that support. Okay. Now, this year what I want to challenge us to do in ELA and also in social studies is if I ask you, let's say for example, do you really understand something? Don't just shake your head, yes, I got it. I want you to be able to prove to me that you got it, that you understand. So for example, if we were to go back and talk about the third person, there's a lot of information there. You maybe didn't catch that. But later, as we practice more, I may ask you to prove it. And the way we prove it is, right, show me that this writer was writing in third person omniscient. And you'll go back into your text and back into your story, and you'll show me evidence from the story of where the author did that. I may ask you to show me an example of irony. You'll go back in your story and you'll show me, all right, well, up to this point, Mr. Bird, as I was reading, I thought this was going to happen with this character, and then it changed. That's an example of irony. I wanted to take just a few minutes to go through that with you guys today. I knew this was kind of an issue that we struggled with. And hopefully as the week goes on, we'll be able to learn a little bit more about this and you'll be able to understand it. Remember again, if you have difficulty with this, you can always go back and watch it again. Thank you very much. Have a good day.